Hey Computer, play About Bees podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. We're back again with About Bees, Culture, and Curiosity, and we're glad you're with us once again. This is Ron Miksha, and
Bidzina Mosiashvili.
I'm glad it's you saying your last name and not me. I would really make a mess of it.
Every episode, I'm going to say it differently.
Do you say it differently? Because I don't notice.
I noted because I have been not on purpose, but just it always comes out differently.
That's funny. That's really funny. I try to say my name the same way each time, but I guess you have more letters in your name, so you have more opportunity to change things around a little bit.
Sometimes I say it in Turkish, sometimes I say it in English, sometimes in Georgian.
Well, how's it sound in Georgian? How did you grow up? Well, you actually grew up outside of Georgia, but your family, like, how would they say it back home?
So my nickname is actually Bidzo.
Bidzo.
Yeah. That's and then Bidzina, or I don't know. It's kind of the same, but it's just that D and the Z. We have a letter for that. There's a letter. It's Z, Bidzina, not Bidzina. That's how it's said here. So in Georgian, it's 6 letters, my name, but in English, it's 7 letters.
I see that. I see what you mean. I know exactly what you mean.
Bidzina, but Bidzina.
Yeah. Well, we did something kind of similar in my name, too, because you can see how it's spelled there, Miksha.
Okay.
And my grandparents out of Central Europe, they spelled it Miksa. But
Miksa.
Without the H.
Okay.
But the S had a little mark over top of it that told everybody, say this S as if it were an SH.
Because the A was said differently.
The S was said differently.
Okay, the S was said differently.
Yeah, so a lot of people would look at my grandfather's spelling of his name and they would say, oh, Ivan Miksha. And his name was not Miksha, it was Miksha.
And you're from Hungary, right? Correct? Or you're sorry.
No. I actually grew up in the United States of America.
No, I mean your grandparents.
A place called Pennsylvania. I know you're from Georgia,
Scranton.
down south.
Are you Scranton, Pennsylvania?
Quite a ways away from there. Like, it's probably a 6-hour drive to get to Scranton.
You know The Office?
Do I know The Office?
The show The Office.
Oh.
With Steve Carell.
Yeah.
It's based out of Scranton, Pennsylvania.
I forgot that very important bit of information because so few shows are actually coming to us out of Pennsylvania. But
that one's a hit.
Yeah. Deer Hunter was too. It was a Pennsylvania town before they went to Vietnam. Okay. Anyway, enough bee talk for now. Let's talk about ourselves. No, just the opposite here. Let's actually talk about what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, just before we move on, I was going to say my last name, Mosiashvili, it's actually Crowchild. If I were to change my last name to English, it would be Mosiashchild. So Crowchild, if you were to take the last name Crowchild Trail, which is a famous last name, it would be Crowshvili in Georgian.
I got it. But the Moshe part is probably not a crow. It's probably something like Moses or something like that.
No, something like. But there's different variants of the Moses last name in Georgia. This is one of them.
Well, that's really cool because Miksha actually in Hungary, which is not quite where my grandparents came out of, but next door to Hungary. In Hungarian, the Miksha name would be translated as sometimes as Moses. Yeah. So we have the same last name. Did you know that?
Yeah, that shit part is just right.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk about bees. Mr. Mosiashvili, did I get that right?
Close.
That was good enough. Yeah, because
every episode you're gonna say it differently.
Well, you do too. You just told us you say it differently every time. So
even Bidzina. I can't get it right.
Bidzina.
That's right.
Bidzina Mosiashvili. We are going to move on a little bit and actually get to something that people are more interested in than us, and that's
who's more interested than us? No.
Yeah, right. Now I can just hear people switching to other podcasts immediately as we speak. Please don't. We will mature here a little bit. What I wanted to mention before we get started on this particular topic is that we talk a lot about bees and how they live and so on and so on. But they have to eat something too. And for a long time, the flower called sweet clover was just like so. It was, for one thing, it's pervasive out here in the West and across the great deal of North America. You can find sweet clover around, but it's just such an amazing plant for the amount of production and how it will survive almost any kind of climate and soil. It does much better in the West on our alkali soil, but it has a lot of other good things going for it too. So today's topic, which we will kind of talk around, and it will kind of make us think about other things that we might also want to discuss. But today, we're basically going to be talking about America's other weed. You know what the first weed is?
Is it marijuana?
No, I was thinking of like ragweed, what makes people sneeze. Yeah, marijuana. So just like marijuana, sweet clover had been kind of popular for a while, and then it became illegal. And believe it or not, sweet clover has been illegal. And then it gained huge acceptance, probably both of these plants, both of these weeds. And sweet clover has... It saw its peak in popularity actually quite a while ago, maybe back in the 20s, 30s or so, when it was known for restoring weak soil, helping to stop erosion, helping to build up soil, make honey.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add, if you talk to construction workers, the first plant that starts to sprout is sweet clover.
Yeah.
On bad areas.
And we see that ourselves, don't we? Like when we're driving along and there's a new road construction, well, you won't see any sweet clover the first year, and that's because it's a biennial. It takes 2 years before, it has to sprout 1 year, and then it's just this little tiny unnoticeable weed that doesn't get more than a few inches tall. Then the second year, it can sprout up a couple meters, which is like 6 feet.
And then help the soil.
And it helps
the roots go down.
Yeah,
right?
and the other thing about those roots that go down is as those roots go down, they bring in nitrogen from the air. So they suck nitrogen out of the air, send it down into the roots, and that restores the soil for other plants. So it's great that way. Plus, it's a weedy, rooty kind of thing. Roots can go down, I don't know, maybe 5 feet or so. So if we have a really dry time, then the roots are usually deep enough that they can get some subsoil moisture.
It's funny that you talk about the roots because another weed, the dandelion, also has very deep roots.
Does it?
Yeah.
Maybe it does.
As a single, like when you try to get it out, you have to really get deep down in there, and the roots can go as sometimes a foot. A little bit less than a foot, but
but that's still pretty deep when you consider the plant itself.
Right, when you can, it will always, a lot of times always be longer than the plant itself. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, these weeds that we always think of that are so pervasive and so they thrive around the world. How much actually benefits that they are doing that we're not thinking about?
That's right.
We all because you just bring up all these facts that the sweet clover does to the ground, to the soil, which is very important because topsoil is being completely eroded right now around the globe.
Yeah.
It is. So I don't know. It's just we're going to be talking about how it's been kind of labeled as a weed, but before it wasn't.
No. Well, it has a really odd history. So sweet clover probably came to North America. It's not native to North America. It probably came to North America as a seed that was accidentally mixed in with the hay that was being brought by the first European settlers. So they brought in sweet clover by accident.
Okay.
There is a record as early as like 1650 or so over in Quebec, where a farmer was growing sweet clover to help, as a food for his cattle and so on.
Yeah.
So it was known, for making hay, and it did arrive probably around then. Although other records, I saw another record saying that sweet clover first arrived in North America in 1738. Now I think that's kind of late. I think that's like 150 years after the first settlers came in, and it probably was around, but maybe just nobody ever noticed it. So when it first arrived, people started seeing it sprouting up in different farmers' fields. So you've got corn growing, and just like you mentioned earlier, disturbed soil, like a construction site, could be like an early farm where you just tilled the soil, you put in a bunch of corn, and which is incidentally a native plant to North America, corn. It was the native people of North America taught the immigrants, the Europeans, how to grow corn. So
which is a wheat.
Is a
it's a corn as a grain.
Yeah,
they genetically modified.
Yeah.
To grow such big.
Yeah. Well,
seeds
they genetically modified it in a very natural way.
Right. It's not really breeding or selective breeding.
That's right. Same with potatoes. Potatoes and corn both, I think, came out of the Andes Mountains and spread over North America. So by the time the Europeans arrived on the east coast of the United States and Canada, the native people living here already knew about both of them.
Very advanced forms of civilization that was going on.
Yeah, there were. There absolutely were. People had learned to adapt to the ecology and the environment and were able to grow things like that. So let's get back to the farmer growing his corn, and he sees some weeds, basically sweet clover, growing in the field. So he goes out there and he pulls them all out so make more space and so on for the corn. Now at that time, that farmer would not have known that the sweet clover is actually putting better nitrogen into the soil.
Yeah.
And it's also like adding bulk to the soil, making the soil richer. So he's out there pulling it out. And then he looks over his shoulder and he sees his neighbor who's a little bit slower and maybe a bit lazy, who doesn't pull out the weeds of sweet clover. And then the next year, farmer A has more sweet clover again, and he has to be out there pulling it out again, and he starts to blame his neighbor for not taking care of his field properly. So you know what you do when you blame your neighbor? Well, in a democracy, you actually make a law.
You call the sheriff, or
yeah. Well, I guess you could take it into your own hands if you didn't have a democracy. But yeah, you call the sheriff and you tell him, like this guy's making life rough for me because he's not taking care of his field. So they started to impose fines, and they go around. Ag inspectors, government officials would ride around the countryside and ticket farmers, make them pay money if they had sweet clover.
This is 1700s.
Yeah, exactly. All the way into the 1800s, maybe 1850 or so. They were still figuring that sweet clover is a bad deal.
Yeah, it was first reported in North America in 1664.
Oh, okay.
But anyways,
yeah. And I think that was in Quebec. I'm not sure, but
it doesn't say. Okay. I don't have it here.
Yeah, but, So that's when it was first reported, and that's believable because if it did sneak in with those people who first settled from England in, like Jamestown colony was in Virginia in 1607. Okay.
Boucherville.
Okay, that I didn't know. But so in Quebec, 1664?
1664.
Right. Okay, so what is sweet clover? For those who are watching us, hi there, on your video cast, we have got a picture up, and it's this kind of scraggly-looking, weedy-looking plant. Comes in yellow and white. Those are two different species, and they grow a little bit differently from each other.
And they're growing in the same place in the picture here?
Yeah, just naturally. Yep.
Right.
You look like you want to say something.
I'm actually waiting for you to finish the picture here. But should we describe the picture so it's just pretty much two different species of sweet clover here. We have the white and the yellow, and they don't really seem that much different other than the color.
Yeah, there are some differences that you won't see easily in a photograph.
Okay.
And part of it deals with the way the stem is structured.
Okay.
And the other thing you can't see too well in the photograph, though if you think about it and look at it carefully, you will see that the yellow sweet clover has been blooming for a longer period of time than the white sweet clover.
Oh, right. It's the flowers are a lot more...
They're a lot more open.
Yeah.
And they work their way up. Like as time goes on,
towards the sun.
Yeah, towards the edges of these flowers are like spikes. For those of you who are listening and not watching, the flowers are like spikes, and the end of the spike opens up last, and the base of the spike closer to the roots towards the main stem of the plant, those open up first. So you can kind of see the plant kind of unfurling itself, and the yellow sweet clover blooms about 2 weeks earlier than the white sweet clover. And a really good honey plant. This is on the side of a road. That's where the photograph is taken. You see a bit of a road in the background. And the thing about that is that, and by the way, I took this photograph in the Rocky Mountains, and the elevation here was about 1,500 or close to 2,000 meters. And just on the side of the road, there was this. But the thing with growing on the side of the road was what Bidzina had already said earlier, and that is that where soil has been disturbed, construction sites, new roads, and so on, those are places where it starts out.
So it prefers well-drained soil, but can tolerate a variety of conditions.
Okay.
Well-drained. I don't know what is well-drained.
That means it's not setting in water all the time.
Okay, so they like it slightly dry.
Yeah. Well, they do actually.
Or like moist, or what that certain one, on top it's completely dry, but underneath it's
there. You go. I think that's what they really would love.
Construction sites are
because they disturb the soil, so water can drain out of it more easily, and well drained means that it's not like in a swampy area, so you won't find much sweet clover in the swamp, if any at all.
And it can also have negative health effects on your livestock.
Yeah, what about that?
Dairy farmers, a friend of mine actually told me, he's a dairy farmer, and it can poison your cows or thin their blood.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
Right.
And I know that dairy farmers can and used to feed sweet clover to their dairy cows and to the same species, which would be cattle. But you have to be careful with the stuff. If it starts to ferment, then the old, it gets wet. Like if you have your sweet clover hay setting out somewhere, there's actually something called coumarin that's it's a natural product that is inside the plant itself. Actually, that's a really neat chemical itself, the coumarin, in that it smells sweet. So it's kind of like the smell you get when you mow the grass. There's just kind of a sweet smell in the air when you mow the grass.
Right.
And that's from the same stuff. But it can also be poisonous. It's hard for an animal, for the cattle and the cows, the dairy cows, to actually process this coumarin in their body. But if it starts to get a little bit yeasty and moldy, then it becomes extremely poisonous.
Right.
And what you were saying earlier before I cut you off is that it will become a blood thinner.
Yeah.
And it's actually one of the products that they use to manufacture blood thinners that you would put out to kill rats, for example. Like warfarin. I'm not sure if that particular product is using a byproduct of sweet clover, but it's a blood thinner. And as the rat eats more and more of this food, it gets sicker and sicker.
So did we just make a tutorial video for how to make blood thinner?
We might have. So don't take us too seriously, folks. It won't work for you. It's just something that in theory. But so that's one of the downsides of sweet clover, and I think that's part of the reason it kind of lost some popularity. But I do, since we talked about the dairy cows, I think this would be a good time to insert just this little mini story. John Lovell wrote a book on the honey plants of North America, and he has a story under his section on sweet clover about what happened in the state of Kentucky So Kentucky is close to your home state of Georgia.
Yeah.
Down in the southern United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go Broncos.
Are they from Kentucky?
I don't know.
I don't know either. They sound like, if you're Broncos, you'd be thinking something like Colorado or something. Like a horseback
Right.
rider.
I should have picked better. But
they do have the horse racing in
the Kentucky
Derby.
State Derby, yeah.
Yeah, yep. Anyhow, in Kentucky back in around 1870 or so, farmers, after the Civil War, the war between the states and the United States, the first one, after that war, the farmers were growing a lot of tobacco because it paid really big money. In Kentucky.
Yeah.
It has the humidity, it has the heat, the long days.
Famous, yes.
Yeah, so
tobacco.
That's right. So they were growing tobacco. But in those days, they were making a lot of mistakes. Well, we still make a lot of mistakes in our agriculture, but
Should we go to the next slide?
No, not yet.
Okay.
No. I want to keep it right here while I talk about Kentucky.
Okay.
Because this is the stuff that that saved Kentucky. According to John Lovell in his 1926 book on the honey plants of North America.
Okay.
What he said was around 1870 or so, farmers were going broke because the tobacco farming was ruining the soil with erosion and weakening all the vitality out of the soil. Mm-hmm. And as a result, the farmers were losing their homes and moving away because the land just couldn't support like 20 years in a row of tobacco farming. The soil was just shot.
Right.
But one farmer noticed cattle in a dry year were grazing on sweet clover because sweet clover is pretty much drought resistant, and they do get a few dry years in Kentucky from time to time. So this farmer thought, hey, he thought, hey, that would be one of the things that might save the cattle that I own. So he was planting sweet clover, and then he realized that the soil was getting better because with all that fiber growing into the soil, plus they were just starting to understand that sweet clover and a few other types of legumes can bring nitrogen out of the air and stick it down into the soil and enrich the soil. So as a result...
just to add a nitrogen. So sweet clover, like legumes, has a superpower. It can fix nitrogen from the air and convert it into usable form in the soil. This natural fertilizer enriches the soil and benefits surrounding plants.
Yeah. So within about 15 or 20 years, Kentucky, the farm country in Kentucky, went from being desperately poor and people going bankrupt and losing their homes and farms into a place that was exporting millions of pounds of sweet clover seed to the rest of North America and lots of dairy products because they were able to feed the cattle this sweet clover. And that was kind of like a turning point for sweet clover. Up until then, it was illegal to grow. You'd get a ticket, you'd get a fine, you'd have to pay a few dollars to the government because you were not being a good farmer. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey, wait a minute, maybe we've been thinking about this wrong. So they started to allow sweet clover to be grown. And the other thing they found was in the state of Kentucky, suddenly farmers who really kept a few hives of bees just for a few pounds of honey every year, just make a little bit of honey for the family, realized that the bees were working the sweet clover really, really well in those areas that had exposed limestone and stuff where the soil is the right kind of pH.
Right.
And Kentucky suddenly had 50,000 beekeepers in the state, keeping 200,000 colonies of bees. Now, that's a massive number of colonies of bees in the 1880s, 1890s. And they were making a lot of their honey off of the sweet clover.
Right.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about what the bees get off of sweet clover. So they fly up to the flower, and are we losing you there?
I just want to see if it's recording.
Oh, that would be nice if it were.
Well, last time it went out.
Okay.
All right,
we're still recording, folks. Okay. So our technician had just stepped in, and he's back now.
All right.
Okay, Bidzina. We're gonna show that next slide that you've been anxiously waiting and asking and pleading and begging for me to show, and here it comes.
Well,
Everybody.
Yeah, you're right. We shouldn't skip around too much.
No, but it's time, because we're talking about now the fact that sweet clover is a fantastic honey plant, and that the state of Kentucky redeemed itself both with soil quality and anti-erosion, and also with honey. So we have 200,000 hives of bees in Kentucky 150 years ago, and this is a picture for those of you who are watching us at home and not just listening to us, but we have. Go ahead and describe it.
It is a zoom in of a honeybee on a sweet clover flower. Sorry, when was this picture taken? I was actually going to ask that. But, you could describe it a little bit better if you like.
Okay, so the picture itself was taken about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was taken by a friend of mine, Stephen Bennett, who has since passed away at a very young age. He was a great beekeeper and a fantastic photographer, and he lived here in the Calgary area. So he took this picture. He gave me so many wonderful photographs that I'll use from time to time, kind of as a way of remembering him. But what we have is a picture of a honeybee sucking nectar off the flower, and at the same time, its legs have got these huge pelts of orangish yellow pollen tucked into the legs. And for those of you who are watching, I'm zooming in and zooming in and zooming in order to show off the bunch of pollen.
You made a GIF.
I did make a GIF.
Is that what? Okay.
I say GIF. You say GIF?
I say GIF too.
Okay, so we made GIFs.
Okay.
And the GIFs are GIFs for the people watching. Anyhow, wonderful plant that makes pollen for the bees, but really what we notice the most, because brood production starts to slow down about the time that the sweet clover is really coming in as a honey source, a nectar source. So you don't really catch bees with a lot of pollen on their legs when they're working on sweet clover, because they are more interested in collecting nectar rather than pollen,
right,
because they have smaller brood nests now and they don't need the pollen as much. So we're talking about making honey off of sweet clover, and this image that we're looking at next is a chart or part of a table that was put together by Ava Crane and Penelope Walker back in 1985, and it's from a paper called Some Nectar Characteristics of Certain, not uncertain but certain, important, not unimportant but important, world honey sources. So they looked at honey sources around the world, and they put together this huge volume, and they calculated the honey potential of the various plants. And it's all listed inside of this. Google it. It's an interesting paper. And it comes from the Ava Crane Trust in England. Anyhow, that's the main part of the image we're looking at, but I also have a headline above it. And that headline reads, Bidzina, what's it say?
250 pounds to 500 pounds of honey per acre. Pellet.
Yep, pellet
1920. Kobalbina, 2007.
Right.
So almost like my name.
Yeah, it is. Very much. Yeah, maybe his first name was Bidzina.
Yeah.
Bidzina Kobina. So those papers are separated by, 70, 80 years. And they basically, both of them talk about measurements that were done of sweet clover to determine how much honey would be found in the sweet clover in a year. So every acre of sweet clover might have about 500 pounds of honey waiting to be collected.
That's right. That's what Gemini is also reinforcing, that the AI. So sweet clover is a honey haven. Sweet clover is so rich in nectar that a single acre can yield a whopping 250 to 500 pounds of honey. That's enough to fill 100 jars and keep a whole lot of bees happy?
Well, it depends how big the jars are, but yeah, it would keep a whole lot of bees happy. So that's an independent study, 2 independent studies, and then the other study is basically like a meta-analysis, a collection, review of different papers, and that's the one I'm talking about with Eva Crane and Penelope Walker from 1985. And here it's interesting because they list 3 very common popular sources of white honey, like white-colored honey, that's produced in the western part of North America, and those include the first one.
So when you read these numbers off to people, they find these unbelievable, but pretty much. So what is the first one?
The first one is alfalfa.
Alfalfa could potentially yield to anywhere from 25 kilograms to 1,000 kilograms
per acre.
Per acre of honey. So
per hectare.
Per hectare.
Yeah.
But so that one beehive could potentially collect up to 1,000 kilograms.
Yeah, and another way to look at it, well, not necessarily the one beehive, because you have to have. Yeah, the other way to look at it, a little more accurately maybe, is a hectare. First of all, is a little bit over 2 acres. 2.2 acres is in a hectare.
Yeah,
it's
which is how many kilometers?
There are 100 hectares in a square kilometer, so it'd be 1/100th of a square kilometer is a hectare.
I mean, like,
1
acre across.
Yeah.
How many kilometers is that?
Oh, well, if you made it a really skinny little acre, like a long lot, then it could be infinitely long if it's infinitely narrow.
No, I mean, like, let's say you have 1 acre of land.
Yeah.
And if you draw a line, if it's square.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Draw a line across.
Okay.
How long is that?
I don't know. Why don't you look it up? Ask Gemini.
Okay.
So your point is that there's a lot of potential honey in an acre of sweet clover, and so if you're looking at a field here in the West, we have quarter sections of land. It's kind of a standard. That's 160 acres, which is a quarter mile by a quarter mile. It's 160 acres. So 160 acres could produce 160,000 pounds of alfalfa honey. No, now I'm mixing up my hectares and my acres again. Let's just say it would produce about 80 to 100,000 pounds.
So if you had 1 square acre of land and you draw a line in the middle of it, and it's a square, the line would come across around 300 feet.
Okay.
Which is, like, I don't know why it's given me in feet.
Well, it's about 100 meters then.
Yeah, 100 meters.
Yeah.
And a bee can fly 5-kilometer radius.
Easily.
So that 2 acres of land is no problem for 1 beehive or 2 or whatever.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. Oh, I see what your question is.
I don't know. I just wanted to see if,
like if a hive of bees sitting next to an acre could actually reach the whole acre and get all of the food off of it.
Yeah.
If the acre is really narrow and very long, it can't. But
like pretty much it would need maybe 100 acres. That would be its max. 50 acres.
Let's
ask it that. 50 acre, 100 acre.
Well, we're still talking a very small area because 160 acres is a quarter mile by a quarter mile. So that's a pretty small area. And the bees will certainly fly 3, 4, 5 miles as they're foraging. So the point is, and maybe we're belaboring this a little bit too much, and some people have already shut us off because of it, but alfalfa can produce about 1,000 kilograms, which is about 2,000 pounds per hectare, and a hectare is a little over 2 acres. So we could kind of say roughly a maximum of about 1,000 pounds per acre is the potential that's in the field of sweet clover of alfalfa. Then the next one on here is Melalotus alba, which is the white sweet clover, and it produces a little less than the alfalfa per acre. And finally, yellow sweet clover. That's Melalotus officinalis. and it's producing between 10 kilograms per hectare and 300. Now, why these numbers are so low on the low end says a lot about the type of climate and soil conditions. We need really alkali soil, which means limey soil and not acidic soil for alfalfa, sweet clover, white and yellow sweet clovers to produce a lot of nectar. If you put them into soil that is mostly acid, which is what you get like in most parts of the East Coast and most parts of the South, the soil is more acidic. And out here, where we are in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, we're on the Canadian prairies. The plains states are south of us, and all that area is very, very rich in alkali soil, which is great for the clovers and alfalfa to produce a lot of honey.
Right. And yeah, so when you see these numbers, it's unbelievable. But we have an expert from here from your book, the Bad Beekeeping blog. If you don't mind me kind of reading.
I do, but go ahead. Tell us.
So this is page 59, honey crop. So my father said, bees don't fill honey boxes stacked in the back of the shed.
Oh.
You got to get them out on the hives. Joe and I were getting the boxes out. All beekeepers were optimistically place empty honey supers on hives, hopeful that the empty honeycombs in those boxes will be full of honey when it's time to remove them. On the Western Canadian prairies, beekeepers are almost never disappointed. Bees can make a lot of honey. In Saskatchewan, the average crop was about 200 pounds per hive. That's why I was there. My goal was a gigantic honey crop. I wanted 300 pounds of honey from each hive. So this is Ron.
That's me.
This is Ron, yeah.
Yeah.
And this would not be a world record. Back in the 50s, a fellow named Rob Smith had his bees working Australian eucalyptus when he produced an average of 762 pounds from 460 hives. Many of his hives made 1,000 pounds of honey each. So some hives were averaging as high as 1,000 pounds each. Yeah. One hive.
Yeah.
This is like this might be the entire crop of some places in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like for their like from their 10 or 20 beehives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because of that little bit of knowledge about Australia. When I was a kid growing up in Western Pennsylvania, taking care of the family's beehives, I really did reach a point in my life where I was sending notes out to people in Australia, seeing if they wanted any young person from Canada. No, I was in the United States then, from the United States to go to Australia. And my condition was they had to pay my way. And then once I got there, I would work for them for wages and pay back the ticket. But I didn't have any takers, and I don't really blame them now. Looking back,
it's hard to do the travel one.
It's hard for somebody in Australia to buy a plane ticket for somebody in Western Pennsylvania and say, I know you're only 19 years old, but you grew up on a family bee farm, and you're really keen to come to Australia. But I knew about those huge honey crops, and I thought, it'd be really cool to go to Australia. But my other choice was Western Canada. And I don't regret having moved to Canada. Like that's been great. It's been really, really good for me. Yeah.
Well, there's all sorts of poisonous critters.
Oh, in Australia. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But just to finish this off,
okay.
Many of his hives had made 1,000 pounds each. 1,000 pounds. The bees were all in one big apiary in a remote forest. He set up a small camp, complete with an extractor. He lived among his bees in the apiary for a year. He would extract almost every day and put the emptied boxes back on the hives. The empties refilled over and over again. This went on for a year. Finally, after months without rain, the blossoms on the eucalyptus trees dried out and stopped secreting nectar. The bees quit making honey. Rob Smith moved his bees away. Wow, what a life.
What a life, yeah. And that was really common back in the 50s.
I should stop doing that weird laugh. But sorry. Yeah, what a life.
You bet. And that's the way people kept bees in Australia back in the 50s. You know, like they would have all the bees they owned in one location. And they would, while the bees are working, they would sometimes do road trips and drive around the area within, say, 100, 200 miles and look for where the next eucalyptus trees would be blooming. And that depended a lot, you know, on a lot of different conditions, but mostly rainfall. So they would head off. Now, Rob Smith was located in Western Australia near the Indian Ocean. So not near Sydney, not near Adelaide, but over near Perth. So he was south of Perth when he had this running. And I was so intrigued with the guy that, first of all, when I saw this little piece in the American Bee Journal years and years ago, somehow the name just stuck to me and I remembered it. So I sent a note to, I think it was actually a honey company in Australia that had a general manager, can't remember his name, but the company was Capilano. So Capilano Honey, a famous brand in Australia. I sent them a note and I said, is this true? And the guy sent me back some clippings from official government records to verify that it was true. And then I wrote a blog piece about this astonishing amount of honey and this gentleman. And lo and behold, after about a year or so, the guy's daughter wrote to me.
Right.
And
she read your blog or just
she saw the blog.
Okay.
And she just wrote to say she was so grateful that her father was being acknowledged as this pioneering beekeeper in Western Australia. She was a very lovely lady. Wow. And she also confirmed these facts. So the fact is, under ideal conditions, one single colony of bees could produce 1,000 pounds of honey. And on average, Rob Smith, back in the 50s, had produced an average of 762 pounds. So he had some hives that only maybe made only 300 pounds of honey, but some of them that went, you know, over half a ton from one colony.
He really put the Rob in robbing.
Robbing his bees. Yeah. Okay, so now we've had all these good things about sweet clover. It builds up the soil. It's a great honey plant. Yes.
There's actually a list of like 10 facts we could go through about sweet clover if you like.
Yeah, well, let's do it.
Okay. So we already know it's a honey haven, up to 250 to 500 pounds of honey. So the vanilla surprise, you mentioned the sweet smell of clover when it starts to ferment. So ever caught a whiff of vanilla while walking through a field? It might have been sweet clover. When dried, this plant releases coumarin, a compound that smells like sweet vanilla. This compound is even used in perfumes and flavorings.
Wow.
Yeah. Time capsule seed. Sweet clover seeds are incredibly resilient. They can remain dormant in the soil for decades, even up to 30 years, just waiting for the right conditions to sprout. Nitrogen fixer, we talked about that. Ancient roots. Sweet clover has been around for centuries. It was brought to North America and Europe in the 1600s for forage and honey production, and it quickly became naturalized. Drought survivor. This hardy plant is incredibly drought tolerant, making it valuable resource in arid regions. It can thrive in conditions where other plants would wither. Pollinator paradise. It's sweet clover isn't just for honeybees. It attracts a wide variety of pollinators, including bumblebees, butterflies, and other beneficial insects. Soil healer. So we talked about how it helps the soil. Dual-purpose plant. While primarily used for honey production and livestock, sweet clover has been used traditionally used in traditional medicine for its potential anti-inflammatory and blood-thinning properties.
Okay, you do want to be careful about that one, I think.
Yeah. And the name origins. So the scientific name of sweet clover, melalotus, comes from the Greek word meli, honey, and lotos, lotus, referring to its sweetness and attractiveness to bees.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, that's kind of
So the ancient Greeks must have recognized it. It would have grown there.
It would have grown there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, actually, I don't know that.
Yeah, and then they named it, or somebody named it after. Like, I guess that was actually the naming convention that they came up with back
So
in.
it has
yeah.
the two names, right? The Melalotus alba.
Mhm.
That's the
White one?
That's the white one, and then the Melalotus officinalis.
Yeah. The officinalis is the yellow one.
Yes.
And there are other species too. Like there are a few other types of sweet clover that we don't have in North America. So we're not going to talk about them because this is a North American podcast.
That's right.
Those are good facts. Those are really good facts. And I think, gentlemen, next time you're out on a date and you want to smell like vanilla, just smear some sweet clover honey behind your ears. Just
like asparagus.
It'll drive your partner wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about the fact that sweet clover production and management was, back in 1914 and 1986. These two separate papers that I have a little chunk out of, and I'm not going to go through all of that, but it's just to basically point out the fact that these plants were promoted by the government in order to help farmers. And one of the ways that they saw them helping farmers was to plow the stuff under, the sweet clover under, after it started to go into bloom, to help build up the soil, return nitrogen to the soil, put more fiber in the soil. And there were farmers too. Like this picture was actually taken in Pennsylvania. Look how tall that.
So could we just go back to the previous picture?
You bet.
So we have, what do we got here? Horses?
Yeah. We have horses in 1922. Actually, in as recently as about 1935, my grandfather on my father's side was already emigrated to Pennsylvania, and he was farming with horses.
Yeah.
And my grandfather on my mother's side, who came from Europe in the late 1800s, he always farmed with horses. He never owned a tractor.
Really?
So all the way up
until what point?
About 1960 or so.
Wow.
So he was farming with horses. He had a horse named Dan. That was his main horse. Dan the horse.
R.I.P. Dan.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So my grandfather too.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So the picture I flipped past a little too quickly,
it's
but
a plow.
It's a plow.
Okay, that's what it is. Okay.
Yep. So it's a plow in a field of. So the picture is in black and white, and it's from an old book, 100-year-old book, printed in 1922, that was published by the government in order to show farmers pictorially. I think there was actually text too. But it just wanted to demonstrate that you should and could grow sweet clover and turn it under in order to enrich your soil. So that's what was going on in that photograph. The next photograph I just threw in from 1949 in western Pennsylvania in an old strip mine where they used to dig out limestone, and limestone was necessary to make secretion of clover honey. And the photograph, for those of you who are watching this, shows a youngish man in 1949 standing among sweet clover that is at least 2 feet taller than he is. And I know how tall that guy was because it was my father. And
Is that your father?
Yeah, so he was 5'11". So this sweet clover is easily 7 foot tall where he's standing. He was a beekeeper, and my
He
father.
could have been 20 in the picture.
Yeah, he was born in 1919, so he's 30 in the picture.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's a young.
People matured a lot faster.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They had to, like, he quit school when he was 14 to start making a living. So yeah, we take for granted our very extended adolescence that sometimes stretches into our 40s.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of movies.
Yeah. Anyhow, he moved bees into this one area where there were strip mines that were taking the limestone in order to make steel, because this was near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that whole area there was steel mills. And to make steel, you needed coal, which was in the hills, and you needed limestone. And then, of course, the iron ore had to float down from I think most of the iron ore that was used around the Pennsylvania area came out of Minnesota.
Minnesota.
There's a huge Mesabi iron ore range there where they produce the iron. Anyhow, just wanted to show a picture of how tall the white sweet clover can get, even in places like Pennsylvania. And my next photograph that I have for those of you who are watching, and you should be watching if you have a chance. I know a lot of people don't have chances to. They just don't have the time to sit and watch a video. I hope some people will, because we do show a lot on these pictures, but we're also trying our best to make this into a podcast that people can listen to as they're traveling or working. You're doing the dishes, it gives you a chance to learn something other than how dirty your dishes are.
That's right.
Okay, so we have a field, and I took this photograph in 1975 when I was a young person, had moved from Pennsylvania to Saskatchewan, Canada. And this is south of the Regina area, pretty close actually to foremost Alberta. So it's in a very dry area, but there were thousands of acres of alfalfa and sweet clover that were grown for hay because it was cattle ranch country.
Yeah, they couldn't use it for anything else, the land. Well, generally where they can't be farmed, they allow cattle to trample it.
That's right. They did. So the hills all around that area, the Badlands, they would just turn the cattle loose for the summer.
Right.
And
they love it.
Yeah, they did. The cattle did really well out there. It was healthy for them, fresh air, lots of walking. Made them their short, pathetic lives had a bit of joy.
Normally, the bison would be.
The bison would have lived there.
Would have lived there and because the trampling actually really helps the ground.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, it is. It was part of the ecosystem for thousands and thousands of years to have herds of cattle running across the prairies.
The vibrations uprooting.
Kicking up the dirt.
Yeah.
But in those days of bison, there was no alfalfa there. The alfalfa had actually shown up not too long before I showed up there. So the sweet clover, did I say bison? I meant to say sweet clover. The sweet clover showed up sometime around 19...
Alfalfa was there?
No.
Or was it also
alfalfa was also brought over. It had a little bit of a different direction. Alfalfa, I think, from what I've been able to determine, came more from the Spanish and not from the English settlers. And it came in more in South America and came up the west coast, like through Mexico and into California. And then it started to spread to the east, while sweet clover and the other clovers were spreading to the west. So they came, a little bit of cross purposes there in the directions that the alfalfa and sweet clover arrived in North America. So we have sweet clover in a field in 1975. Sweet clover had been grown there by ranchers for maybe 40 years, 30 or 40 years before I arrived. So it was relatively new. Before that, there was no sweet clover in that part of the world. And the farmers would basically make hay out of grass. So then they learned to actually seed and plant. Now, it's a really interesting photograph. We're looking at a big field in a valley surrounded by badlands, and in that field is at least a section, like 160 acres of sweet clover, and some of it's been mowed or cut down to dry on the ground to be made into hay. And that's something that just doesn't happen anymore. This might have been, during my time there in Saskatchewan, it might have been one of the last times that sweet clover was grown intentionally to make hay.
Right.
Because they realized, like you pointed out earlier, it's not the very best of foods for the cattle.
Yeah,
Alfalfa's better.
It can be dangerous.
Yeah. Alfalfa's much safer and much better. So this is a tame planted field, a huge field, but sweet clover also has a tendency to spontaneously pop up out of the ground, especially something that's disturbed, like you pointed out earlier. But I want to show you an example and talk about it a little bit. This is also in the Badlands, and this was also in 1975. So it's
like a painting.
It's got what?
It looks like a painting.
It does look like a painting, and everything that's kind of on the yellow side in this old photograph is sweet clover. Nobody planted it. Nobody planted this. So what had to have happened is there would have been a really wet, windy spring the year before, because it's a biennial, and that wind and the rain would have disturbed the soil on the Badlands. And disturbed soil then helps the sweet clover sprout. And sweet clover seeds can last easily 30 years.
Yeah.
So they can be out there in the field for 30 years until conditions hit.
Perfect conditions.
This was perfect conditions. So we had a nice wet spring, and the following year, I had sweet clover everywhere.
There is that rabbit you keep pulling out of the hat.
Man, yeah, that was good. That was really good. So sweet clover, wonderful for the bees, wonderful for the farmers. And
so was that year really good for you?
Oh, yeah. That was one of my 300-pound per hive years.
Wow.
It was, yeah. That was a great year. With all that sweet clover around, the bees were good. They were healthy and strong. And I had the good fortune of keeping bees in my youth when mites weren't around yet either.
Huh.
So I didn't have to
do any varroa mite.
No, they didn't show up in Canada until maybe around 1980 something.
The warmer climate. Was it the warmer climate that?
No, they hadn't been accidentally imported into North America yet.
Oh, they got accidentally imported.
Yeah,
that's what happened.
That's what happened. Yep. Somehow.
Accidentally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some swarms showed up. Like I'm not sure if they came up from South America, but they were in South America before they were in North America.
Yeah.
And there were ships that would sometimes come into Florida with swarms on board. It's also possible that somebody brought them over from Europe. That's always a possibility because there were also varroa mites in Europe. And, they might have been thinking, well, we're going to bring in some new queens or something or some bees. That would be not an accident. That would be a pretty big mistake if anybody did that. They don't know for sure. They don't know for sure how
so it's a more recent phenomenon.
Yeah, since I can't remember the year anymore, but it'd be like the mid-'80s, I think, was about when varroa mite first started to be shown around.
In USA
in
and
USA.
Canada?
And Canada was only a year or two behind.
Wow.
Yeah. One day we'll do a little more research and do a deep dive into the origins of varroa mites. But for today, it's sweet clover, also an invasive plant, but considered a weed these days by a lot of people. But the government was still talking, as recently as the mid '80s. This one I think was 1986. They published a sweet clover production. Like how to grow sweet clover in Western Canada. So the government was still promoting that. And this I love. It's from 1986. And this is from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And, they're very much into building bridges and building reservoirs, dams, and so on, and helping people have better soil and better conditions. So what they did was an environmental impact on sweet clover. Now, if you were going to do an environmental impact, study on sweet clover today, you'd probably talk about how it's a noxious weed that doesn't belong here. But in those days, when they wrote this, what they basically focused on was how helpful yellow sweet clover is for a list of various native animals: pheasants, grouse, prairie chickens, partridges, ring-necked pheasants, quail, muskrats, cottontails rabbits, ground squirrels like the Richardson ground squirrel, pronghorned antelope, elk, wapiti, mule deer, white-tailed deer. So all of these creatures, according to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, were benefiting from people setting aside bits of land in order to...
There's habitat for them.
Yeah, habitat for them. So I went through this whole manual, the report, and it was like a very legalistic report with a cover page that had, all kinds of sign-off statements, and Dr. So-and-so signed it, and Dr. So-and-so underscored or witnessed that, this was research, and this was a paper, and this was an impact statement. And I went through it really carefully. And I finally found an area that said cautious, cautions about sweet clover.
Yeah.
Nothing about the fact that it's a wild plant that could invade places and disturb native plants. Instead, the cautions were make sure that that during dry years you give it a little extra water to make sure it grows. Maybe don't drive over the land after you've seeded. So in other words, the cautions were how to make sure the sweet clover survives rather than how to kill it because it's in the wrong place.
Huh.
So that was as recently as 1986.
And then they just flipped a switch.
They did, but that switch was kind of slow in flipping because now I have something from the American Bee Journal of 1903. We're looking at another paper here, and the title is Sweet Clover, Is It a Noxious Weed? So even as early as 1903, but we talked about, too, that it was absolutely illegal to grow it back in the 1700s, early 1800s.
Right.
So in 1903, they were still debating this. Like, is it legal? Is it a weed? Is it noxious? Is it bad stuff? And so they knew about that a long time ago, that there's that potential, that it's not a good thing.
So this was when? When was this article released?
1903.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're a little bit obsessed with sweet clover, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I really am. I know here we have a whole episode just on sweet clover. We'll talk about other plants. I mean, the goldenrod is a great one to go on and on and on about. Maybe fireweed sometime.
Right.
Sweet clover, I just like it so much because of the huge potential. And for those of you who actually are watching, you saw those pictures earlier of our the fields of sweet clover that were being made into hay, and then the hillsides covered in sweet clover. I mean, it basically paid off my farm, my bee farm, my honey farm, by producing sweet clover honey. So I'm very partial to the stuff, although I do recognize. And a few years ago, I didn't. I even wrote some blog pieces where I was complaining that people were cutting down sweet clover and removing it. And I thought, don't do that. I love sweet clover. But I have to admit, having studied ecology a bit at university now recently, I have to admit that maybe there's a time and a place for sweet clover. And that time might have been 50 years ago. And that place might have been, like back in Europe where it came from. So maybe it's wrong. Maybe having the sweet clover around is not the best thing.
So while sweet clover offers many benefits for bees and the environment, there are also some negative aspects to consider.
I know.
So some of them are the invasive potential. Sweet clover, especially the white sweet clover, can become invasive. It spreads easily and can outcompete native plants. Risk of spoiling hay. When sweet clover is improperly cured for hay, it can develop a toxic substance called dicomarol. This can cause a serious bleeding disorder in livestock if ingested. Limited grazing value. While sweet clover can be used as a forage for livestock, its palatability is lower than other legumes. So it's a legume. It also contains coumarin, which can give milking of grazing animals an off flavor. Oh, it can give the milk of grazing.
Okay.
Not only potential allergens. Some people may experience allergic reactions to sweet clover pollen and may develop similar to hay fever symptoms. Uncontrolled spread. Due to its prolific seed production ability to spread easily, sweet clovers can quickly take over fields and roadsides if not managed. Negative impact on biodiversity. In natural areas, sweet clover can displace native plants, reducing biodiversity. Management challenges. Not suitable for all soils. Are you to blame for all this?
I am.
Ron,
Yeah, I know. I am. I am, and I apologize for spreading this noxious weed. I'm not as aggressive of a spreader of noxious weeds as some of my best friends were. When I lived in Saskatchewan, I had some friends that were beekeepers up in the northern part of Saskatchewan. And they were an elderly couple when I was a young man. So their history goes way back, big-time beekeepers like in the 30s and 40s. That's a long time ago, almost 100 years ago. And I knew this family. They've both passed away. The husband and wife have passed away some years ago already. Wonderful people. Just love them. They were both so kind and helpful for me, teaching me about beekeeping in Saskatchewan and so on. But here's the story. So one morning I stayed at their house, and one morning I'm up about 7:30 and I said, hey, I'm off to a good start this morning. They were just coming back. They had been out with their truck. So they had this big Ford flatbed truck, a red truck, and on the back of it, the wife, Josephine, sat with a seed sprayer, like one of those hand cranked. You put like a big bag of seed, and then and the husband, Earl, was driving on the side of the road just before sunrise when he wouldn't be noticed by too many people, with his wife on the back, sitting, hanging her feet over the back edge, and he's driving really slowly, and she's cranking out sweet clover seeds, spraying it along the edge of the road where they had just built a new road. So he wanted to be sure that new road would have an abundance of sweet clover, a year or two later. And it did. It did. They were so successful at spreading this noxious weed for their honeybees to take advantage of. It was just amazing. And I just thought, that's such a cute story. I still picture them, him driving slowly, gray-haired guy, and driving this big 1-ton truck, dual-wheeled, and his wife sitting in the back on the flatbed spraying out seeds. And totally, I don't know if it was illegal then, but I know that there would be people who would have kind of thought, you shouldn't be doing that.
It's like the Scotsman that brought over the dandelions.
Is that how the dandelions got here?
I heard that it was one of them. It was an Irishman or a Scotsman that brought over dandelions for salad making.
Oh, for salad making.
Yeah, because in the spring or one month out of the year, you can use their leaves to make really nice salad.
Well, now the whole of North America is covered in salad every spring. We should celebrate that. We should know his name. It's probably like McGareth or something like that.
Yeah, let's actually figure that out.
Yeah, because this guy needs to be celebrated for spreading salads.
Well, I think in some high-end restaurants they sell it.
Yeah.
It's pretty expensive.
I thought it was bitter, though. I thought, like the dandelion leaves are kind of on the bitter side.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they are, yeah. I think I tried them when I was a child. Of course, my Hutterite friends make some of the best wine out of dandelions. The dandelion wine, plus they make a pin cherry wine, too. So they have a red wine and a yellow wine, the yellow being from the dandelion. And both of them, man, they had some real good winemakers at the Hutterite colonies. Really good, very, very, very knowledgeable.
So that doesn't give a name.
Doesn't give a name. We'll just call him McGareth, Scotty McGareth.
Let's call him Scotty McGareth.
Why not? He's got to have a name. Okay, I only have a few more pictures here, and we're going to wind down here before too long. But we were talking about how it became an invasive species. And I lived and worked in a place, I own my honey farm in southern Saskatchewan, in a place that's called the Grasslands National Park now. So my bees used to actually be in the area, some of them, not all of them, were in the area of what is now a national park, one of Canada's newest national parks. It's a cultural heritage site because when Sitting Bull beat up General Armstrong at the Little Bighorn, he brought his troops, the natives, up north into southern Saskatchewan. So he lived in the area of the park, of the Grasslands National Park. So we have teepee rings, that are still set up, and those rings are rocks that held down the edges of the teepee so that the wind wouldn't blow the teepee around. And
what is this area called again?
Grasslands National Park in Saskatchewan. And that's where I lived. And I kept bees out there. And the sweet clover was everywhere. But now I took this off of Facebook, and thank you very much for Grasslands National Park itself for publishing this picture. What we're looking at now are some young people who have got snake bite resistant boots on, and they're carrying bags, and they're hiking over the Badlands, pulling up little bitty sweet clovers.
It's invasive.
Because it's invasive, and they want to restore the national park to what it would have been like before sweet clover moved in.
I see. Yeah, so in 1981, an agreement was signed between the Canadian federal government and the province of Saskatchewan to establish grasslands as a park.
Yeah.
And then it was not until 2001 when it was officially a national park.
Right. So I had left Saskatchewan by that time, but I was there at the signing, 1981. I went to the meetings because I was living there, and I was very curious. And I wanted to know what their intentions were and how big the land was going to be and how many bee yards I'd have to move out of the park and so on and so on. And it's an interesting area, very unusual, rolling badlands, not craggy mountains but a very dry area with buffalo and ferrets, the black-footed or black-tailed, I should know these things, the little animals. The only prairie dogs in Canada live in this valley.
Ooh, I could go for a prairie dog now. No.
You could,
No.
yeah. Okay, you go for one.
Isn't that a food?
Prairie dog? No.
No, I'm thinking of a whistle dog or something.
I don't know what you're
I think
thinking about.
Like a hot dog.
Yeah, it's inside your brain, not mine. But anyhow, it's a gorgeous area. It does have rattlesnakes, so people had to be careful. But these kids were paid. Mostly ecology students who are out there ripping up the sweet clover so that it would be out of the park. Now, I know that they would know that the seeds are around for 30 years. And the seeds are going to blow in from these fields and roadsides that aren't more than, a kilometer or two away from the edge of the park.
Makes them feel good.
What they say is that there is a rare horned lizard that has trouble negotiating around the sweet clover. And they wanted to make sure that the path was clear for these little lizards. So they had to get rid of the sweet clover.
Your bees probably contributed to the sweet clover's flourish.
Oh, yeah, they certainly did, because I did have bees for years in what is now the park.
Wow.
And but these guys, I'll read a little bit of what it says on the Facebook webpage that belongs to the Grassland National Park. And the photograph that we're looking at is a couple of young people standing near a butte in the grasslands, and it's rocky and it's dry, and one of them's reaching down with gloves and pulling up something out of the ground, which is probably sweet clover. Removing yellow sweet clover eliminates a barrier to lizard movement, and it increases habitat quality in the Grasslands National Park. The lizard surveys will contribute, they're doing lizard surveys, will contribute to the survey data that Parks Canada will use to monitor the ecological integrity and lizard populations. Thank you to the volunteers. Okay, they're volunteers doing this. So I imagine, if you're an ecology student, this would be really great to put on your resume that you had spent a summer pulling up sweet clover and helping lizards at the Grasslands National Park. Enhancement for greater short-horned lizards. So that's what they are. They're the greater short-horned lizards that they're doing the habitat.
So that's sweet clover they're taking out? Sweet clover, okay.
Yeah, sweet clover is what they're pulling up. So they do have a Herculean type of a project ahead of them, because I have a photograph here taken back in the 1970s, and there's a person that you can't quite make out, but it's my brother Joe, whom you also mentioned earlier when you were reading out of my bad beekeeping book.
Joe and I.
Joe and I. So this is Joe.
Who is this mysterious Joe figure?
This is half of Joe and I. And he's standing in the Badlands in the national park where we used to go hiking, just, like just on our Sundays, just take a day off and go see stuff. And we'd go hiking.
Pretend to be a bee. Just pretend to be a bee for the day.
Pretend to be a bee for the day and just kind of chill and enjoy. So
Scout.
All the yellow in this picture, and there's quite a bit. I mean, it's not everywhere, but all that yellow is sweet clover. It all needs to be pulled up.
Yeah.
If you want to restore it to what it used to be. And you also have the problem that next year, or whenever there's a nice wet year, those 30-year-old seeds are going to sprout again and come back up and look just like this. So it is a tough job. I have sympathy for the people who are trying to restore this. I just wonder if they could do other things that would be more helpful for the ecology of the national park.
Well, the greater short-horned lizard is a fascinating reptile to North America. Despite being called a horned toad, it's actually a lizard.
Okay.
I don't know. This unique creature is known for its distinctive appearance and intriguing behaviors. So they're found in a variety of habitats, from grasslands to deserts to forests and mountains.
Oh.
So they prefer open areas with loose soil and sand, which allow them to burrow for shelter. I'm just thinking, like, how endangered are they?
Yeah, if they cover all those in habitats.
Yeah. Grasslands to deserts to forests.
I guess it's a slippery slope, though, isn't it? Like if we can say, well, we don't need them in the grasslands, and somebody else is going to say, we don't need them in the forested areas because we need to mow down the trees.
But it's just like, there's other plants. Why is sweet clover being targeted?
Well, because it's probably one of the few that are really invasive.
Because it can grow in the pathways where normally other plants are not growing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you walk around in those badlands, you find a lot of places where the easiest place to walk is like a little tiny rivet, like a place where water had flown, had flowed earlier in the spring. So there'd be like a little track, and in that track then will be sweet clover during the summer.
So it might be disturbed.
So the animals, the animals that would have lived in that shaded lower area and been able to dig their holes and go up and down, like surely they're being interfered with by having the sweet clover there. And I don't think there are that many other plants that are growing in the Grasslands National Park that also are invasive. Like mostly it's grass and cacti. There's a lot of cactus down there.
Right.
So things like that are natural, native, and they're going to stay. But the sweet clover is one of the few things that they can look at and recognize as being a problem. So they go out there and they pull it up. And I wish them well with that. I just think it's a really, really tough project. Meanwhile, yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Meanwhile, let's get rid of all the sweet clover, except you can go on Amazon and buy as much as you want, which I think is really cool because, part of us are saying this is an invasive weed, and part of us are saying for $50 you can have 5 pounds of invasive weed to spread around your area. And there are beekeepers here in the Calgary area who have purchased a lot of yellow sweet clover.
It's a lot more expensive than the weed that we normally know.
Oh, yeah, America's other weed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it more expensive, 5 pounds for $50? Come on.
Well, they're selling seeds.
Oh, yeah.
But it looks...
Yeah.
I don't know.
You wouldn't need that many seeds to really have what's the legal limit of growing marijuana in your house?
I think you can have 2 plants or 3 plants, something, or maybe 4, and then one plant can yield up to like 100 grams.
Oh wow!
200 grams.
Wow. So if it's 3 plants per person, and you've got 4 people in your house.
Yeah, and you can travel up to 32 grams.
Okay.
Across provinces on the plane.
Oh.
Up to 32 grams.
Okay.
Cannabis.
But you wouldn't want to fly into the United States with that, would you?
No, that would be you get shot down.
That'd be a federal crime.
They would shoot you down with a AC-130.
Probably. But you could probably take the noxious yellow sweet clover seed with you across the border.
I think they would allow that one.
They would allow that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It probably comes from there.
I think, except for some idle chit-chat, I think we're kind of towards the end of what I really wanted to cover with yellow sweet clover.
Well, I was going to talk about, so what can be done about invasive plants without doing a mass pullout campaign? And I asked the Gemini, and it said biological control. So we can introduce natural enemies. These involves releasing insects, pathogens, or other organisms that specifically target the invasive plant, reducing its population.
Okay.
That could be a little bit of a tricky.
That could be tricky because, these days, though, the farmers are not planting sweet clover.
Right.
Like
it's natural.
Right. So it's growing wild on the side of the road. So if it did get carried away and got away from the national park and started to kill sweet clover other places, it's probably not going to make too many people upset.
Yeah, I don't know. But it could... what if that starts to become invasive, introducing the natural enemy?
Oh, yeah. And once it eats all the sweet clover, what's it going to work on next? The alfalfa? Then you will have people that would be pretty angry.
Yes. And then, so we can introduce grazing. Certain livestock, like goats, can be used to graze. It's actually funny. You know, the bison, the European bison, has been reintroduced to the Caucasian mountains.
Oh, back in Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know that I didn't know that bison lived there.
I did not either.
Yeah, so they went extinct about 1920.
Oh.
And the last known Caucasian bison was living in a German zoo, and it was one of the 12 ancestor of bisons that repopulated the European.
Oh.
They were bred with just regular cows. But I don't know. I'm just bringing this up because we maybe need to reintroduce more big grazing animals into fields, like en masse.
That you're right about that.
Yeah,
you're right about that. And these Grasslands National Parks, they the buffalo had gone extinct down there, but they reintroduced buffalo maybe 10 years ago or so.
Yeah,
into the Grasslands National Park. Yeah.
Good. That could be trampled the ground and not grow. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
That might. So another one could be chemical control, targeted herbicides. That was.
There you go. I could see these kids, instead of reaching down and pulling up the plant, they just have a big tank.
Roundup.
Yeah, a tank of Roundup on their back and a spray hose, and then every time they see something that looks like sweet clover, they go whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
Oh, they should use drones.
Oh, there you go.
Target.
Yeah.
The sweet.
Drop little bombs, like just make little tiny bombs
Spray
that fall
bomb,
down. Yeah. When they hit the sweet clover, it explodes and.
Big business opportunity for you.
I think so.
Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Mr. Trudeau, I'm sorry.
Mr. Trudeau.
Mechanical control, mowing or cutting.
Mowing or cutting. Well,
repeated mowing or cutting can weaken invasive plants. Or burning. Prescribed burns.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that's a doctor prescribes you a burn.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Prescribed burn. Okay, so cultural control, promoting native species. So planting native grasses, wildflowers, and shrubs can create competition for invasive plants. So why don't we do the opposite, start planting native plants and make them like just for fun?
I think people
like,
are
why
doing
doesn't
that.
Amazon sell?
They do.
I know, but it's like on more mass.
Yeah, it's all what the public wants. I mean,
Amazon
Amazon
opportunity.
Yeah, Amazon will have them for sale if people ask for them.
So we can do changing soil conditions, altering soil moisture, pH, or nutrition levels can create conditions less favorable to invasive plants.
Mm-hmm.
But sweet clover doesn't care.
No, but if we went out there with acid and sprinkled acid around everywhere that there was sweet clover, then that would neutralize the soil and make the sweet clover have a tougher time growing in the national park.
Yeah.
That maybe would be something we could send a note to to the Parks Canada and suggest that they do that.
But wouldn't that harm the other plants?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
It would be devastating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mulching. Applying thick layers of mulch can suppress invasive plants by blocking sunlight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then that's going to affect everything else, though.
Yeah, we're talking national park here. They're probably right. You go out there and you pull it up by hand. Every time you see a little twig of sweet clover, that's one less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
the
just
way
think
to go
it's
about it.
I think it's something that just is doomed to fail, and I'm wondering if the money could be spent on other things that would promote the integrity of the park more.
So they could do education and outreach, raising awareness. What if they set up a bounty so they get the public to do it, and you bring back a certain amount of weight of sweet clover, they pay you money.
Absolutely.
That could work.
That would
because
work.
you would always want to incentives always work.
Well, when I lived in Val-Marie, Saskatchewan, that's near the Montana border inside of Canada, when I lived in that small town, there were a lot of youngsters, say ages 8 to about 12 or 13, who made all of their summer money by trapping and killing ground squirrels. So the ground squirrels would dig into the farmers' fields, or those creatures were so amazing. These little ground squirrels could dig into a hard surface, tarred, paved road and make a hole in the middle of it. And, you drive down the highway and you see this gopher sticking its head up out of the ground, and as you got closer, it would duck down into its hole. So they would make a mess. So the kids would trap and kill these gophers, cut off their tails, and get a bag full of tails and take it into the rural municipality office, and they'd be paid 5 cents for every tail they had. So
That's why there was no psychopaths back then. They were.
Yeah, that's right. They weren't being trained as psychopaths. Instead,
they were taking their energy out on the squirrels.
Yeah, no, I don't know. That's a good point there, though. Does that make people a little more callous about life? When it's worth a nickel, and you can go out and kill something and get a nickel. Or does it teach you that, I was a kid then, I've grown up, I'm not going to kill, We also had a problem. At the time I lived in southern Saskatchewan near the Grasslands National Park. There's a town called Val-Marie on the edge of the park. That town, by the way, is now the headquarters of the park. But not too far from the town, maybe 10 or 20 kilometers, there were a number now I forgot the word for it. Prairie dogs. Number of prairie dogs. So prairie dogs are different than gophers.
Right.
The Richardson ground squirrel or gopher, those are also called gophers. They're different from the prairie dog. Prairie dogs live in these big communities, and they're a much bigger animal. The problem I was going to bring up is that kids would go out there in the evening sometime in their pick-em-up trucks and sit on the back of the truck and shoot.
The prairie dogs.
The endangered prairie dogs.
Oh.
Yeah.
They're endangered.
Well, yeah, because they're the only ones in all of Canada.
Oh.
And they're limited to that area.
Oh, the grasslands.
Yeah.
So the prairie dog, it's like a gopher, isn't it? It's not really a dog, isn't it?
Right. It's like a gopher.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's like a rat. It's more in that family than a canine. It's not a cat. It's not a dog.
Are they still being shot at, or are they still endangered?
They're not being shot at. I don't think they are in danger there. Yeah.
Very cute.
Yeah, they are. And they make a really neat chirpy sound. So those of us who didn't shoot them but drove out to look at them, we could park our vehicle and roll down the windows. And I would do this sometimes after working a bunch of bees. They have these big cheeks because they're just so full of food. And they would talk, and they would go, chip, chip, like a kind of a sound. Then you hear one further away going, chip, 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 and going back and forth like that. It was a lot of fun. That was really great. Just to listen to them, just to see them.
I think one of them, as I saw, oh, never mind. I thought they were fighting or something.
And I shouldn't brush all the people in Valmarie, Saskatchewan as going out and shooting prairie dogs, because it was only a very small number who did that kind of stupid stuff.
Yeah, people like to. I don't know why that is, but yeah, that's kind of what happened with the bison in the Georgia. They got extinct.
Yeah,
just for shooting.
Yeah,
for fun. And then they're
1920.
Yeah, 1920 was the last known, and then they. I don't even know if they eat the meat. It's usually always done for trophy stuff.
Yeah.
I find that odd, but
yeah,
humans will be savages.
No, humans will be human.
Yeah. Well, no, I think humans will be savages sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. But even I know a lot of young people who have done some really dumb things, and then they mature and they regret it. I know one person told me that he used to go around the town of Valmarie, Saskatchewan at night, and if he saw somebody's garden hose sticking out, like people watering their flowers or whatever, and garden hoses lying out in the middle of the night, he'd turn it on. And, if there was an open basement window, he'd put the end of it so it would start filling up, some strangers, somebody's house with water.
Flood the basement.
Flood the basement. Yeah. And, he said, man, I was so stupid.
And that's the most evilest ones, because you're not there to get a kick out of it.
No.
It's not like you get to see a reaction.
Yeah.
You're leaving.
You're leaving as fast as you can. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So people
some sort of
I don't know what
demonic possession that people get.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of a bit of a possession, but I don't want to get into that now.
No, we'll do that another time.
Yes.
We have lots of other opportunities, but I think that kind of goes through our Sweet Clover story for today.
Does. Yeah.
I do
like other plants. I'm more of a sunflower person.
Yeah, they are pretty cool. Sunflowers are okay too, but I think they're also invasive, aren't they? Not native?
I'm not sure. But we should do an episode on all the native versus non-native plants, and then the great exchange that they call.
Yeah.
You know about that? The great exchange?
Yeah. I think I know what you mean.
Yeah,
so
I'm going to put... But yeah, sorry, just summarize. So pretty much chocolate...
Tomatoes,
potatoes, corn,
squash,
all these
cotton,
tobacco.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And they were all they weren't known to the world.
Right. They were known to some people.
They were known to the North America and South America.
Yeah.
And this was this great exchange.
Yeah.
Where they gave us these plants.
Mm-hmm.
I mean. And then we brought over a bunch of other stuff too. And then they say disease, but sorry.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
But they also gave us, syphilis comes from North America.
Oh, I don't know about that, and I don't want to go into that because that sounds, unless
there was an exchange of everything.
There was an exchange of a lot of things. Yeah. But we in turn brought over yellow fever. And measles and smallpox. So, there was an exchange. That's kind of a low note to end on, syphilis and smallpox.
Yeah, but I wanted to kind of end on the corn, like, So, all these great things, like chocolate is one of the greatest flavors.
Isn't coffee from, no, coffee I think is from...
looking at, but it's not.
It's not,
Ethiopia or something.
Yeah. Do you know the story behind coffee?
Like it's goat herder.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And it wasn't that long ago. I was surprised. It was like around the year 700 or 800 or something. Some goat herders.
850, yeah.
850?
850 AD. That's
Yep. And this guy is watching the goats go a little bit hyper when they were eating the coffee beans, and he thought, hey, that looks like fun. I think I'll try that. And that's how we got coffee into the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, so according to legend, a coffee plant was discovered in Ethiopia by a goat herder named Kaldai around 850 AD, who observed increased physical activity in his goats after they consumed coffee beans.
Mm-hmm. And he said, I want to be like a goat.
He wanted to be like a goat.
Just like a goat. Yeah.
I would love to be. Have you seen those ibex climb those mountains?
Yes.
The cliffs.
That would be the goat that I'd want to be.
Yeah.
But they're not goats, are they? The ibex.
Goat family. It's like a
very similar. Yeah. Yeah. But that might be the same as saying the cat is in the dog family.
Is it?
No, but maybe the ibex is not in the goat family.
How come the goat, kind of bringing back to another low point?
Oh, no, I don't know if I want to hear another low
Why is
point.
the goat always depicted as the evil animal?
Oh, they're
Symbol.
mischievous. They're really mischievous.
Right, they're mischievous.
They are.
There's those square eyes too. Those very odd rectangular square eyes. Have you seen their eyes?
Yeah, I have. I've been up close to goats. Some of my friends were goats. I think it's mostly because the goat. Oh yeah, you've got some pictures of their. Yeah. They don't have a round. Oh yeah, that looks mischievous there in that picture. So it could be that that they're just so
Krampus.
Yeah, they're so Krampus. Yeah, they are destructive.
Yeah, they'll eat anything.
Yep, and they will come up to you and knock you over if they can to see what's in your pocket. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So goats are not nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so join us next week's where we talk about goats and why bees are kind of like them.
Okay, if that's what we're going to talk about, I'd rather choose a different topic, and I don't even know what that's going to be next. Oh no, I think I do know what it's going to be next time. I have invited a guest to come in next week.
Right.
And he's originally from Cameroon in Africa. He was a beekeeper there. And he is a very active beekeeper here in Calgary.
Yeah.
And a very nice guy. Okay. And I'm just really looking forward to just learning from him to see what he does. He does some volunteer work with with an immigration society that's run by the Catholic. I can't remember the name of the outfit, but it's something like the Catholic Immigrant Society. Anyhow, it trains people who are new to Canada about things like beekeeping and things like gardening and farming in our very distinctive climate here that we have. So he is involved in that, and he's a very good beekeeper.
Every time I hear Cameroon, I think of macaroons.
Yes, this is different.
This is different?
Yeah,
Okay.
This is the inedible country of Cameroon, which is, I think, on the west coast of Africa, and it, I think, is also a French-speaking area because the French had grabbed a bunch of coastal areas along that area.
Yes.
And
maybe that's where the name macaroon comes from. Hey, we should probably end it like there.
that's a real upbeat now. Yeah.
Too upbeat?
Looking for our next conversation, and that's going to be with Patrick, who is from Cameroon originally. He's a Calgarian, Canadian, so I'm looking forward to that. Okay, Bidzina, it's been fun. We want to definitely thank everybody for staying with us to the very end, an hour and a half later. But we really do appreciate the audience. Really happy to have people listening in, and it'll be great to hear back from the audience at some point too. So we'll leave it at that now, and thank everybody again. Thank you, Bidzina. It's been Bidzina, and it's been great. Okay. So long, folks.
Thank you. So long. Until next week.